The Depths to Delve Deep by writer. Chapter 39 Roslyn Chapel. Rote rides the bus to Roslyn the next morning. He arrives at the outskirts of the small town, again wondering why Roslyn Chapel and Roslyn, Scotland are spelled differently. He thinks while walking down the road, still a few kilometers from the first stronghold of the Knights Templars in Scotland, what it would be like riding a horse in a hurry to hasten the hell well on its way back in the day when Oliver Cromwell comes. Road passes by Roslin Institute, a research and development center. It's where none other than Dolly the sheep is cloned. Used by the genetic gist in the midst, he carries on maybe a half hour or so more along the road before the relic hunter enters the tiny hamlet of Roslin. He passes through the town towards the quiet road going to the chapel. Through the gated cloister and into the chapel proper, Rope bypasses paying any fee. It's Sunday, and he figures there'll be a way to usurp the service as one of the congregation. The chapel, like most of the ancient architecture seen since he's been in Scotland and England, is undergoing reparations. Some umbrella-like scaffolding structure is superimposed over the exterior of the compact cathedral. Not bothered by the hovering hindrance, Rope climbs the scaffold stairs up to a planked wall around the chapel's apical exterior. He's eye to eye with the intricate details of the masonry carved out of stone several hundred years ago. It's quite impressive to see something so fine in detail. It still stands strong since the building of it began in 1456, amidst centuries of Scottish weather and warring. Now inside the chapel he converses with the congregation after the service, sipping coffee, smiling, and talking. The interior intrigues him, immediately taken by the grandeur, albeit miniature scaled size of the chapel, dwarfed by the six other Gothic cathedrals seen pictured on the internet. Each one erected, including this cathedral like chapel, is on one of the seven sacred Druid sites, all in accordance with the Knights Templar specifications schemed in the biblical books of King Solomon. The intricate details in the design are deemed to be that much more proficient. Even the length and width of the floors are solemnized, etched and sketched by King Solomon's specifications, or so goes the inclination. A deified design deemed and dictated by a Te Deum Requiem, a painstaking procession to perfection. Nothing escapes Rhodes' detection. A fine minute detail to every design and carving on a fine minute detail to every design and carving on each of the walls and ceiling, along with the three main pillars, is phenomenal. There's an abundance of green men made like masks likened to faces, portraying Pan or maybe Bacchus or both under the different guises amongst the pantheon of pagan deities representing rebirth and fertility. Their endless ivy-like floral tracery of masonry. It cleaves and climbs all over with life itself. It's mixed with maize or corn carvings flaring flora. It suggests someone must have seen plants indigenous only to the Americas. Rote returns to Roslyn Chapel again and again. Rote hears the honorary Templar of the temple is not only the benefactor of the Gothic chapel, he has a castle close by, literally a stone's throw away. Sir William de St. Clair. He lies in state as the founder and force behind Roslyn Chapel. His sarcophagus-style stone coffin, apparently with his remains within, though not verified by Rote, are down below in the lower chapel. It's covered with a nicely carved stone slab signified with his sword and shield supporting the cross pathe. It's a medieval Christian emblem denoting the cross of the Crusades. The stone slab is weathered and worn to the hilt. It rests in the Lady Chapel above the burial vaults and crypt, all cryptic. Rote's blown away by the vast array of biblical figures and scenes, all with some shrouded significance seen in some stone moldings varying from Celtic, Christian, and Judaic symbolic representations of sigil scenes and sites. The interior is an artisan's avenue of appeal. The structure's size and import is so intent on enduring astronomically to the exact biblical blueprint of King Solomon's temple. The effort in that front alone allows anyone spiritual to sense an arcane aura. Though, as Rote researchers, some think a more due denunciation will serve the sinister sight, a dark Scottish Masonic rite. Rote figures the Knights Templars, like early Holy Rollers, the Rosicrucians, Cathars, and some Celtic colleges carry the same suspicion. and so are condemned by the Catholic Church for challenging their containment on Christianity, even forcing some St. Clairs supposedly to testify against them. Rote remembers seeing at the temple in London 2 knights riding the same horse, and now he sees the same seal of the Knights Templar carved within the chapel. He figures the Knights Templars are the forerunners to the Freemasons of today, involved in metaphysical matters deemed devilish, not to be delved in as far as the devout are concerned, or so contrived by the Catholic Church. For on Friday the 13th, 1307, Pope Clement V, under pressure from Philip IV of France, rounds up all the Knights Templars and, like the last Grand Master, Jacques de Molay, burns them at the stake. With those thoughts, Rote leans towards the 3 pillars, the Master Pillar, the Journeyman Pillar, and the infamous Apprentice Pillar. The fabled Apprentice Pillar is labeled with Latin words, Forte est vinum fortio est rex fortio sunt emilia superior omnia vincent veritas. Wine is strong, a king is stronger, women are stronger still, but truth conquers all. As Rote understands, the Apprentice Pillar gets its name after it's built. The Master Mason leaves the chapel before it's built to define the divine design. Meanwhile, the apprentice divines the design and builds it. Upon his return, the Master Mason flies into a rage after seeing the design already divined and done. The finished pillar is so far beyond his own masonry skills, he decapitates the dumbfounded apprentice, and he either buries his head within the pillar or buries the beheaded beneath. Rote's heard some people think Joseph of Arimathea, the supposed uncle of Jesus Christ, responsible for his burial, brought his head to Rosslyn Chapel sometime after his deified demise. Maybe it meets the same fate within the pillar as the apprentice. There's an even earlier story that probably precedes both legends, wherein Hiram Abith, Solomon's master mason, is murdered by his 3 apprentices. Another arcane avenue Rosslyn Chapel lends to legend stretches around most of Europe as well, that being the Shroud of Turin, or some other holy cloth can be found on chapel ground. Whether it's Baphomet, the Holy Grail, or the Shroud of Turin, Rote revels in the religious reliquary and leaves enlightened the lore of it all. How imaginative and significant to some these stories must seem. They are to Rote, enhancing the whole experience with an engaging energy. Outside the chapel are sparsely scattered shrines and situated gardens in an overgrowth guise. Rote digs inside the dirt and scoops out a beautiful shell with a well of tow. Somehow knowing it's buried, oh no. He lets the rain wash it clean and drinks from its well like it's the Holy Grail. Refreshed and with his sacred chalice confined to his person, he returns inside the chapel and hopes the pouring rain outside will subside. He pockets a leaf, a stick, and a stone scooped out of a hole in the floor just beneath the apprentice pillar. He heads outside down the path to Rosslyn Glen, relieved the rain has stopped. Along the way, he passes the ruined rampart remains of the progenitor and proprietor of the past castle grounds, Sir William de St. Clair, Prince of Orkney, who is a Norman, as all the ruling classes come William the Conqueror to the Tudor times are in most part. Rote walks over the arched bridge and sees the keep is now in ruins, with its bright red stone rampart remnants quarried from the gorgeous glen gorged with a wondrous waterway down below. It still has an air of officialdom as it daunts the drop that bluffs down. While Rote scrutinizes the smashed bulwark, a man approaches him with his own take on what happens to this bastion of the glen. After a brief chat with the castle keeper, he learns that the villagers pick away at the stones to support their own structures, leaving it in ruins. Rote shakes his head subtly. He surmises it takes more than hands to haul down the wide-walled wreck. It takes intent. Just by the thickness and size of the ruined ramparts, Rote thinks Oliver Cromwell and his cronies caused the collapse of the castle. Primeval parliamentarians pillaged and plundered the castle into crumbs in 1650, though for some reason they must have feared the fearsome forces behind the chapel. It's left completely intact. Rote learns later Cromwell might have used Rosslyn Chapel as a horse stable. Rote continues to contemplate about what's left of the ruin and its red yew stone walls wide width. He imagines it takes loads of cannon fodder to rout the ramparts. For this once magnificent manor, so solid and sturdy in structure, now is in one sorry state. Rote, still standing beside the caretaker of the castle grounds, does believe part of his theory that the villagers of the day walk away with the stones, though not only after the fact. Surely no villager in the vicinity will partake in picking away piecemeal the walls of a castle while a Knights Templar is asleep in his keep. However, from the rover can tell, no one in their right mind would leave the lofty heights of that hold without the winds of war. That aside, Rote heads on his way down below, under a huge archway still strong enough to hold the weight of war. It stands solidly, like a ramp to the room ramparts, now and surely back then. Rote slips and slides along the moist, meandering route under and through the ancient arch, towards the river running through the glen. He ambles along in the proximity of places like Rosewell and Polton, and in the area of Lonehead and Lasswade, through the Roslin Glen Gorge hovered by Maiden Castle and Hawthornden Castle, where the river North Esk runs through the valley. After a while along the trail, Rote sees something. It sort of catches his eye peripherally across the river, hewn midway up rock face, an opening. Nah, he thinks as he continues along, coming to a sheep pasture. Soon he passes over and around the glen, gallivanting what seems the entire gorge, getting himself so far from where he starts that morning he gives up any hope of backtracking. He'll instead forge a new path back, determining his track by what he's beaten so far. Rote remembers something he reads in his trusted guidebook, The Lonely Planet, a book he peruses periodically while visiting local bookstores. There's supposedly a retreat for writers, hunkered in some castle, camouflaged somewhere in Roslin Glen. He thinks he's seen it in the distance earlier on the other side of the river Esk. It leads him to look endlessly for a place to cross over, though unsuccessful. After hours of hiking, he encounters some unsheared sheep pastured. He has some shaggy thoughts. They look a little too dirty. He passes by some people who are no better at giving him help with directions than that sheep he thinks of shagging. Then comes along a gallant woman galloping on a horse like Lady Godiva. Unfortunately, this woman is wearing gloves. She kindly points him in the right direction. By now he just wants a way out of the glen, towards a town or hamlet where he can work his way back to Roslin and then on into Edinburgh. He's told to follow that path there, turn left, and you'll come to a gate. Follow the narrow, winding, and very steep road up, and then all the way down to the belly of the gorge. There you'll see a tiny hamlet. Finally, he comes through the tiny hamlet of houses by way of one road. On the road, he decides to stick out his thumb and let the first car to stop from whatever direction make the decision for him. A few minutes later, a car does stop. A fellow gives him a ride all the way back to the bus stop, arrived at earlier in the day. Rote's new friend fills him in on the ambient nature of the area along the way. He's been living in the area of Roslin all his life, and lauds in a light-hearted way a vast knowledge of its lore. When he hears of Rote's recent account of where he's been, well, the new friend adds some more insights on the sight seen, aglow so with a gist of the glen itself. Fairies inhabit it. Also, the entrance to a cave Rote imagines seeing on the far side of the river in his earlier role is not a figment, it's fact. It's the very cave Sir William Wallace hides from the English for over a year with apparently 50 men. The dimension of the story expands and contracts depending on who tells Rote the story, as he'll later find out. He's sure the First War of Scottish Independence, known as the Roslin Battle, takes place in the area in 1303. It's easy for Rote to believe the Wallace, being the very light for any fight for freedom, was there, if not in person, in spirit. Rote could not have been happier to hear this fellow fill his ears with tales of William Wallace. The cave must be braved. His heart will hold him to that thought. Rote plans to return to the glen repeatedly.